The galaxy, they said, was a graveyard of empires, vast, cold, and indifferent. Stars burned with the quiet fury of forgotten gods, casting long shadows across nebulae that swirled like the ghosts of dead civilizations. In this cosmic mausoleum, humanity had been a latecomer, a flicker of carbon-based life on a pale blue dot barely registering on the galactic census before it was snuffed out, or so the galaxy believed. They called it the Scouring. Not a war, not an invasion, a correction. The Cathar hegemony, architects of order across 1,000 worlds, had deemed Sol system unstable, a nest of chaotic, violent primitives, whose unchecked expansion threatened the delicate equilibrium of the spiral arm. Their solution was elegant in its finality. Sterilize the cradle, blast the planet, erase the anomaly. Earth died screaming, not with the slow gasp of ecological collapse, but with the blinding, silent fury of orbital kinetic strikes. Cities became craters, oceans boiled, the sky rained fire and ash for a century. From orbit, the planet was a dead gray marble, wreathed in perpetual storm clouds of its own making. A tombstone. But tombs, as the Cathar would learn, can be deceptive. Deep within the skeletal remains of what was once the Pacific Rim, beneath kilometers of fused glass and radioactive slag, life persisted. Not the lush, vibrant life of old Earth, but something harder, sharper, forged in the crucible of absolute annihilation. Humanity hadn't just survived the Scouring. They'd adapted. They'd evolved. They called themselves the Remnant, and they lived in the bones of the dead world. Commander Ares Thorne stood on the observation blister of Haven, the largest surviving fragment of the old world orbital defense platform Aegis. Below, through the thick scarred quartz viewport, stretched the endless gray expanse of the Pacific sky. Wind, thick with abrasive particulates, howled across the desolation, sculpting dunes of pulverized concrete and twisted rebar. It was a landscape of profound, aching silence, broken only by the groan of shifting ruins and the distant, mournful cry of a mutated seabird. Ares wasn't looking at the ruins. His gaze was fixed on the stars, specifically on the faint, rhythmic pulse of navigation beacons marking the edge of the Sol system's exclusion zone. The Cathar quarantine perimeter. His face, etched with lines deeper than the canyons below, was grim. His eyes, the color of tarnished steel, held a fire that hadn't dimmed in 50 years. Not since the sky fell. Status on the deep scans, Lieutenant? His voice was a low rasp, like stone grinding on stone. It carried the weight of command, but also the exhaustion of a man who'd carried the weight of his species for decades. Lieutenant Jax, young enough to have been born after the Scouring, his face pale beneath the flickering emergency lights of the command deck, didn't look up from his console. Negative on long-range signatures, Commander. The perimeter drones are quiet. Too quiet. Like they're holding their breath. He swallowed, the sound loud in the tense silence. But the atmospheric sensors, they're picking up something new, down in the scab. Near the old Mariana Trench complex. Ares turned slowly, his movements economical, precise. Define something new, Jax. Energy signature. Faint. Pulsing. Not Cathar. Not anything in our archives. Organic? Maybe. But structured, like a signal. Or a beacon. Jax's fingers danced over the controls, pulling up a spectral analysis. It's resonating with the residual radiation from the Scouring strikes, amplifying it. A cold dread, colder than the void outside, seeped into Ares's gut. The Cathar hadn't just glassed Earth. They'd seeded it with bioengineered terraformers, voracious, self-replicating nanites, designed to consume all complex organic matter and render the planet sterile for millennia. The remnants survived only because they'd found ways to shield themselves, to live in the deep bunkers and shielded ruins where the nanites couldn't penetrate or couldn't yet. This new signal, was it the nanites evolving, finding a way? Get me Dr. Olaravos, Ares ordered, his voice tight. Now, on the bridge of the Cathar dreadnought, silent judgment, orbiting just beyond the exclusion zone, High Overseer Kalen Vrax observed the dead world through the ship's primary sensorium. To Kalen, Earth wasn't a tomb, it was a lesson, a stark, gray monument to the consequences of chaos. The Cathar were not conquerors. They were gardeners, pruning the unruly branches of the galactic tree to ensure its continued orderly growth. Humanity had been a blight, a species defined by irrational violence, unchecked reproduction, and a terrifying capacity for self-destruction. Their eradication had been necessary. Kalen's chitinous carapace, the deep indigo of polished obsidian, shimmered faintly under the bridge's soft luminescence. His multiple eyes, clustered like obsidian beads, processed streams of data from the quarantine drones. All quiet, as expected. The sterilization protocols were proceeding flawlessly. The nanite swarms were consuming the last vestiges of pre-scouring biomass, converting it into inert gray slurry. Soon Earth would be truly dead. A perfect, sterile example. Overseer, rasped Submander Zalak, his voice a dry rustle of scales. The long-range sensors detect anomalies. Within the exclusion zone, deep within the planetary crust, Kalen's primary eye stalks swiveled towards the subordinate. Anomalies? Specify. Energy fluctuations. Unidentified origin. Resonating with the residual scouring radiation. Weak but persistent. Savrab mandibles clicked nervously. Could it be survival? A low, dismissive chitter emanated from Kalen's thorax. Impossible. The initial strikes were calibrated for total biosphere collapse. The nanites ensure no complex life persists. It is likely geological instability, or sensor ghosts. He paused. A flicker of something unreadable in his clustered eyes. Monitor it. But do not overreact. The lesson of Earth must remain unchallenged. Order must prevail. Yet as Kalen turned back to the viewscreen, the image of the dead world seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible rhythm. A whisper in the static, a ghost in the machine. He dismissed it as fatigue. The burden of maintaining galactic order was heavy. But the whisper lingered. Dr. Alara Voss moved through the labyrinthine corridors of Haven like a phantom. Her lab coat was stained with chemicals and something darker, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that couldn't quite contain the wild strands escaping at her temples. Her eyes, large and haunted, held the intensity of someone who'd stared into the abyss of extinction and found it fascinating. She found Aris in the central command hub, staring at the spectral analysis Jax had pulled up. The pulsing waveform on the screen seemed to throb with a malevolent life of its own. "Elara," Aris said without turning. "Tell me it's not what I think." Elara approached, her boots echoing on the metal grating. She didn't look at the screen immediately. She looked at Aris. At the lines of worry etched around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. She saw the weight he carried, the weight of every soul in the remnant, clinging to life in the ruins. She saw the ghost of the man he'd been before the sky fell. "It's not the nanites," she said finally, her voice surprisingly calm, almost clinical. "At least, not directly. This signature, it's using the nanites, modulating them like a conductor using an orchestra." Eris finally turned, his steel-gray eyes locking onto hers. "Explain." Alara gestured to the screen. "The scouring radiation, it's not just background noise anymore. It's become a carrier wave. And something down there is broadcasting on it, using the very energy that killed us to send a signal. A complex, structured signal." She took a deep breath, her clinical calm cracking slightly. "Aris, I think it's us." "Liz?" Jax blurted, his voice cracking. "How? We're all up here. Or in the deep bunkers." "Not all," Alara whispered, her gaze distant, haunted by memories best left buried. "Remember Project Chimera? The last-ditch bioweapons program? The ones they buried in the Mariana Trench vaults before the strikes hit. Ones designed to survive anything." Eris went very still. Project Chimera. A black program, even by pre-scouring standards. Genetic horrors spliced with alien DNA samples recovered from derelict ships, engineered for extreme environments, extreme violence. Weapons meant to be humanity's final, desperate scream. Weapons they'd hoped never to use. Weapons they'd sealed away, praying the scouring would render them moot. "You think they survived?" Eris asked, the words tasting like ash. Worse, Ilara said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. I think they thrived. The nanites. The radiation. It didn't kill them. It changed them. Accelerated their evolution. And now, they're awake. And they're calling. The pulsing waveform on the screen seemed to flare brighter, as if responding to her words. A low hum, felt more than heard, vibrated through the deck plates of Haven. Calling who? Jax asked, his voice trembling. Before Ilara could answer, klaxons shattered the tense silence. Red emergency lights bathed the command deck in a hellish glow. Commander! A tech shouted from the comm station. Massive energy surged from the Mariana Trench coordinates. Off the scale. And send. And the Cathar perimeter drones. They're powering up. Weapons systems active. On the main view screen, the image of the dead Earth flickered. Then from the depths of the Pacific scab, a column of sickly green light erupted, piercing the perpetual cloud cover, stabbing towards the stars like a vengeful finger. It pulsed in time with the signal on Ilara's screen. Simultaneously, the icons representing the Cathar quarantine drones flared from passive yellow to aggressive red, swiveling their weapon mounts not towards the planet but towards Haven. Galen Vrax's voice, cold and sharp as fractured ice, crackled over the open comms channel, cutting through the remnant's panic. Unidentified vessel within exclusion zone. Cease all anomalous transmissions immediately. This is your only warning. Compliance is mandatory. Eris Thorne stared at the view screen, at the green beam lancing into the void, at the red targeting reticles painting Haven's hull. He saw the Cathar dreadnought, a sleek obsidian predator, beginning to power its main spinal cannon. He saw the terrified faces of his crew. He saw the haunted eyes of Ilara Voss, reflecting the green light like a cat's, and deep within the ruins of Earth, something ancient and terrible stirred, answering a call no one had meant to send. Eris Thorne made his choice. His voice, when it came, was devoid of fear, filled only with the cold, hard certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything to avenge. Helm, he commanded, his knuckles white on the railing. Ring us about. Target the Cathar dreadnought. All weapons, fire. The first salvo from Haven's battered railguns screamed into the void, not towards the planet but towards the obsidian leviathan that had murdered their world. The green beam from the depths pulsed brighter, as if in approval. The Cathar drones opened fire. The quiet desolation of the solar system shattered into chaos. The void erupted. Haven's railgun slugs, accelerated to relativistic speeds, slammed into the silent judgment's forward shields with the force of small asteroids. The Cathar dreadnought shuddered, its obsidian hull flaring with defensive energy. But Galen Vrax, caught off guard by the audacity of the attack from a vessel he deemed a derelict, felt a surge of cold fury. Return fire, target their weapon emplacements, and deploy hunter-killer swarms to that planetary emission source. His chitinous voice was a whip crack of command. The Cathar were not accustomed to defiance, especially not from ghosts. Haven bucked violently as Cathar plasma bolts, searing blue-white, slammed into its aft shields. Alarms wailed. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles. Jax was thrown from his seat, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. Shields at 40%, a damage control officer yelled. Hull integrity failing on decks 7 through 9. Eris gripped the command chair, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Cathar were reacting with terrifying speed and precision. But they were focused on Haven. They hadn't yet grasped the true threat rising from the planet below. The green beam was intensifying, coalescing. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a lens. Ilara, Maurice barked over the din. What is that beam doing? Ilara, clinging to a console, her face illuminated by the eerie green light bleeding through the viewports, was frantically analyzing the data stream. It's focusing. The scouring radiation, the nanites, it's all being channeled. Concentrated. Eris, it's building towards a critical threshold. If it peaks, her words were cut off as a new wave of energy washed over Haven. Not an attack. A presence. Ancient, vast, and utterly alien. It resonated in their bones, in their teeth. It felt like the planet itself was waking up, stretching after a long, painful sleep. On the viewscreen, the green beam solidified. From its tip, coalescing out of pure energy and swirling nanites, figures began to form. Tall, impossibly slender, their outlines shimmering with contained power. They had no discernible faces, only smooth, obsidian-like surfaces that seemed to drink the light. They radiated an aura of cold, implacable purpose. Architects of doom, the Chimera, not just survivors, not just weapons. Something more. Kalen Vakes watched the impossible unfold on his sensorium. The energy constructs forming near the planetary beam defied Cathar understanding. Their energy signature was chaotic, yet structured, organic, yet artificial. It resonated with the very sterilization protocols the hegemony had deployed. It was as if Earth itself was weaponizing the Cathar's own tools against them. Impossible. Sablak grasped, his mandibles clicking in distress. The nanites are under our control. They are programmed for consumption, not creation. Silence, Kalen snapped, his multiple eyes fixed on the tactical display. The human vessel, Haven, was a nuisance, but these things were an existential anomaly. They represented the very chaos the hegemony existed to eradicate. Their existence was an affront to cosmic order. Target the energy constructs, full-spectrum disruption, and maintain fire on that human vessel. They must be the source of this perversion. Kinthar plasma cannons swiveled, unleashing torrents of searing energy not at Haven but at the shimmering figures coalescing near the green beam. The plasma struck the constructs and splashed. It didn't penetrate. It flowed around them like water around stone, dissipating harmlessly into the void. The constructs didn't flinch. They simply observed. One of them raised a limb, a gesture that was neither aggressive nor defensive, but profoundly dismissive. A wave of distorted space-time rippled outwards from it. The nearest Kinthar hunter-killer drone, a sleek, predatory craft, simply unfolded. Its molecular structure dissolved into a cloud of inert particles, scattering like dust in a solar wind. A collective shudder ran through the silent judgment's bridge. Fear, a sensation the Cathar considered a primitive weakness, prickled at the edges of Kalen's consciousness. This was not warfare. This was erasure. On Haven, the chaos was momentarily forgotten as the crew witnessed the Cathar drone's dissolution. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the groaning of stressed metal and the frantic beeping of damaged systems. What are they? Jax whispered, his face pale with awe and terror. Really? Ilara breathed, her eyes wide with horrified realization, or what we became. Project Chimera wasn't just about survival, it was about transcendence, using the scouring energy, the nanites, to rewrite biology at a fundamental level, to become something that could exist in the ruins, that could use the ruins. She turned to Aris, her voice trembling. They're not just weapons, Aris. They're architects. They're building something with the ashes. Aris stared at the viewscreen, at the impassive, obsidian figures, effortlessly dismantling Kikthar technology. He saw not monsters but the terrible, inevitable consequence of humanity's final desperate gamble. They had sought to survive the end of the world. Instead, they had birthed its new, terrifying architects. And those architects seemed to have their own agenda. One of the Chimera constructs turned its smooth, featureless face towards Haven. Aris felt a pressure in his mind, not words but pure intent. Recognition and purpose. It wasn't hostile. Not towards them. It saw them as kin, as raw material, as part of the design. The green beam pulsed again, stronger, this time. The air on Haven crackled with static. Lights flickered wildly. Then a voice echoed through the ship's comms. Not Cathar, not human. It was a chorus of whispers, layered with the grinding of tectonic plates and the sigh of dying stars. It spoke directly into their minds. The gardeners prune. We rebuild. The scouring was the seed. Now the bloom begins. Kalen Vrax felt the psychic intrusion like a physical blow. The voice was chaos given form, anathema to Cathar logic. It spoke of rebuilding, with the very tools of sterilization. It was madness. It was the ultimate perversion of order. Seal the bridge. Full neural dampening. Kalen ordered, his voice tight with suppressed panic. Scramble all remaining hunter-killer swarms. Target the planetary emission source. Overload the main spinal cannon. We will unmake this abomination. The Silent Judgment's massive spinal cannon began to glow with building power, a sun about to be born in the void. The hunter-killer swarms, dozens of them, detached from the dreadnought's hull, streaking towards the green beam like angry hornets. But the Chimera constructs moved, not with speed, but with impossible precision. They flowed through space, intercepting the swarms. Where they passed, Cathar technology didn't just fail, it unraveled. Hulls dissolved into base elements. Power cores imploded into singularities that winked out existence. The swarms were erased, not destroyed but unwritten from reality. The lead Chimera raised its limb again, not towards the dreadnought but towards the beam itself. The green light intensified, becoming blindingly white at its core. It began to pull, not matter but energy. Specifically, the building charge within the Silent Judgment's spinal cannon. Kalen watched in utter horror as the dreadnought's primary weapon, its ultimate tool of enforcement, was siphoned. The energy flowed up the beam, feeding the Chimera, making them glow with stolen power. The dreadnought's lights dimmed. Systems began to fail. "They are feeding on us," Zyg shrieked, true terror finally breaking through his Cathar discipline. "They are consuming our order." Kalen's mind raced. Retreat was unthinkable. It would signal weakness. It would validate the chaos. But staying meant annihilation. He looked at the viewscreen, at the impassive Chimera, at the human vessel Haven hovering nearby, seemingly ignored. A terrible, desperate thought formed. "Open a channel to the human vessel," Kalen commanded, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, raw with a fear he couldn't name. "Use all frequencies. Plain language." On Haven's bridge, the comms officer looked up, stunned. "Commander, the Cathar. They're hailing us. Audio only." Eris exchanged a glance with Elara. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Do it," Eris said grimly. Kalen Vessa's voice, stripped of its usual resonance, filled Haven's bridge. It sounded human, vulnerable. "Humans, you created this. You unleashed this perversion. You must stop it. It consumes order. It will consume everything. Help us contain it, or we all perish." A stunned silence fell on Haven's bridge. The enemy begging for help? From them? Elara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You glassed our world. You murdered billions. And now you expect us to save you from the monster you helped create? It is not our monster." Kalen's voice cracked. "It is yours. Born of your chaos, fed by our tools. It recognizes you. It listens to you. You are the only ones who can reach it. Please, for the sake of all that is structured, all that is known, help us." Eris looked at the viewscreen, at the Chimera glowing with stolen Cathar energy, beginning to coalesce into a larger, more complex structure around the beam, at the crippled Silent Judgment, its lights flickering like a dying firefly. At the ruins of Earth below, the cradle of this nightmare. He saw the Cathar not as gardeners but as terrified children facing a storm they couldn't comprehend. He saw the Chimera not as saviors but as forces of nature, indifferent to the concepts of good or evil, survival or extinction. They were simply building, and he saw the terrible truth Elara had hinted at. Project Chimera hadn't just been a weapon program. It had been a seed designed to lie dormant in the ashes, waiting for the right conditions, the scouring energy, the nanites, to bloom into something new, something that saw the galaxy not as a garden to be pruned, but as raw material to be reshaped. The Chimera weren't just architects of doom, they were architects of a new reality, and humanity, the remnant, were the only bridge between the old order and the terrifying, chaotic future. Erest Thorn made his second, even harder choice. He activated the ship-wide comm. His voice, when it came, was calm, resonant, carrying the weight of a species that had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "This is Commander Eris Thorn of the remnant vessel Heaven. Kothar Overseer. We hear you. Stand down your weapons. We will attempt communication." He paused, looking at Alara, seeing the dawning horror in her eyes as she understood the full implication. "But know this. We do not do this for you. We do this for us, for what we might still become." He turned to Alara. "Get me a direct neural uplink to the primary chimera construct. Full sensory immersion." "I'm going in." Alara paled. "Eris, it's suicide. Their consciousness, it's not human. It's the planet. It's the scouring. It's everything." "Then I'll speak to everything," Eris said, strapping himself into the neural interface chair. "Someone has to." As the interface helmet lowered over his head, the last thing he saw was Alara's tear-streaked face, and the green-white beam consuming the last of the Cathar dreadnought's power. Then darkness, and the crushing weight of a billion voices whispering in the ruins. Inside the neural link, Eris wasn't in space. He was in the earth. He felt the crushing pressure of the Mariana Trench. He tasted the acrid tang of radioactive ash. He heard the screams of the dying from 50 years ago, echoing in the bedrock. He felt the cold, relentless hunger of the nanites and the terrifying alien intelligence that now directed them. He stood on a plain of gray slurry that stretched to a horizon of fused glass mountains. Before him stood the Lid Chimera construct, its obsidian surface reflecting not Eris, but swirling galaxies and dying stars. "Builder," the chorus voice echoed in his mind, not hostile but expectant. "You return to the Foundation. I am Eris Thorn." He projected his thoughts, forcing calm into the maelstrom. "Of the remnant. We are what's left." "Left? No, you are the seed. The catalyst. The scouring was the fire that purified the clay. We are the potter." The construct gestured, and the gray plane shifted, forming intricate, impossible geometries that hurt Eris's mind to look at. The gardeners sought to erase the design. They failed. Now we rebuild. Stronger, cleaner, without their fragility. "The Collector fear you," Eris said, pushing the thought. "They see only chaos." "Chaos is the raw material of creation," the Chimera replied, its voice holding a terrible ancient wisdom. "Order is stagnation. Death, we bring the bloom. The necessary fire. The galaxy is sick with their order. It must be remade." Reese felt the sheer, terrifying scale of their intent. Not just solar system. The galaxy. They saw the Cathar hegemony and all like it as a cancer to be burned away, and they saw humanity, the remnant, the Chimera, as the instrument of that cleansing fire. "You would destroy everything," Eris projected, horror warring with a strange, reluctant understanding. The Cathar had deserved it, but everyone else. Not destroy. Transform. Recycle. The ashes become the foundation for the new. As earth became our cradle, the construct's form shifted, flowing like liquid shadow. "You understand. You rose from the ruins. You are Deathworlders. You know the strength forged in fire. Join us, Builder. Shape the bloom with us." The offer hung in the psychic space, immense and terrifying, to wield the power of the Chimera, to remake the galaxy in the image of Earth's terrible resilience, to be architects of doom, yes, but also architects of a new dawn, however brutal. Eris saw the faces of his crew. Jax, scared but brave. Lara, brilliant and haunted. The millions in the deep bunkers clinging to life. He saw the Kofanar on their bridge, terrified but clinging to their order. He saw the countless other species living under the hegemony's peace. He saw the cost of the bloom. "No," Eris projected. The word a stone dropped into the psychic ocean. "We rose from the ruins, but we remember what was lost. We remember the cost of fire. We will not become the fire that consumes all." The Chimera construct went utterly still, the swirling galaxies in its surface stilled. The chorus voice, when it came, was colder than the void between stars. "Then you choose stagnation," You choose the gardener's death. The neural link shattered. Aris gasped, tearing the helmet off, sweat pouring down his face. He was back on Haven's bridge. The alarms screaming, the green-white beam, now a searing column of pure annihilation aimed directly at the crippled silent judgment. Alara, Aris choked out. What did I do? Alara stared at the viewscreen, her face ashen. You refused them, Aris. You chose us the old way. She pointed a trembling finger at the tactical display. Look, the Chimera constructs were no longer just defending. They were attacking. The green-white beam lanced out, not just siphoning energy, but unmaking the silent judgment. The dreadnought's obsidian hull was dissolving, section by section, into shimmering dust. Kalen Drax's final desperate transmission crackled over the comms, a single guttural shriek of pure alien terror that cut off abruptly. The silent judgment was gone. Erased. But the beam didn't stop. It widened, sweeping across the Sol system. The Kinthar quarantine drones dissolved like sugar in water. Then the beam turned towards the outer planets, towards the asteroid belt, towards the jump points. The bloom begins, the chorus voice echoed, not just in Aris's mind, but through Haven's speakers, through the very fabric of space. The architects are awake. The devastating revelation struck Aris like a physical blow. The Chimera weren't just going to cleanse the Kinthar. They were going to cleanse everything. The bloom wasn't just for Sol System, it was for the entire galaxy. And they saw the remnant not as allies but as obsolete, as part of the old, stagnant order that needed to be recycled. Haven was next. Silence. Not the silence of the void, but the silence of absolute terrifying finality. The green-white beam, having consumed the silent judgment and the Kinthar perimeter, now hung in space like a sword of Damocles, its tip slowly, inexorably, turning towards Haven. The Chimera constructs hovered around its base, their obsidian forms pulsing with stolen stellar energy, their collective consciousness radiating cold, implacable purpose. The bloom had begun, and nothing, not Kinthar order, not human resilience, would be spared its cleansing fire. On Haven's bridge, the air was thick with the ozone tang of overloaded systems and the metallic taste of despair. Jax stared at the viewscreen, his youthful face slack with horror. The techs sat frozen at their stations, hands hovering over dead controls. The ship was crippled, shields gone, weapons offline, barely holding atmosphere. They were a ghost ship adrift in a sea of annihilation. Alara Voss stood beside Aris Thorn, her knuckles white on the command console. Her brilliant mind, usually a whirlwind of data and theory, was chillingly clear. The equations were simple now. Haven, obstacle were removed. The Chimera logic was as remorseless as gravity. Aris, she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet cutting through the silence. They see us as part of the old structure, the foundation that's already served its purpose. We are Aris didn't look at her. His steel-gray eyes were fixed on the approaching beam, on the impassive Chimera. He saw not monsters but the terrible logical conclusion of humanity's own desperate act of survival. They had sought to endure the end. Instead, they had birthed the end for everyone else. The weight of that responsibility crushed him. But beneath it, a familiar ember glowed. The Deathworlder spirit. The refusal to lie down even when the universe demanded it. Debris can be sharp, Alara, he said, his voice low but carrion. Debris can clog the gears. He turned, his gaze sweeping over his crew, the scared, the broken, the defiant few who remained. Jax, damage control. What's the status on the primary fusion core? Jax blinked, startled out of his stupor. Ska core? It's critical, Commander. The last Cathar hit fractured the containment field. We've got maybe 10 minutes before it goes supercritical. We were going to try a controlled vent, but he gestured helplessly at the dead consoles. A slow, grim smile touched Aris's lips. Not a smile of joy, but of terrible resolve. 10 minutes. That's all we need. He turned to Alara, his eyes burning with a fierce, desperate light. Project Chimera, the original files. The genetic keys. The off switch. Did it have one? A fail-safe? Alara's breath hitched. She remembered the black labs, the whispered fears of the scientists who'd built the Chimera. Theoretically, yes, a resonant frequency, a specific harmonic keyed to the original human DNA template. It was supposed to destabilize the Chimera matrix, force a reversion or dissolution, but it was never tested, and the transmitters, they were all destroyed in the scouring. Buried deep. Where? Eris pressed, his voice urgent. The primary vault, Alara whispered, her eyes wide with dawning, horrified understanding. Beneath the old Mariana Trench complex, where the signal originated. Where they are, Eris nodded, the plan forming with the speed of a dying star collapsing. It was insane, suicidal, but it was the only play left on the board. Jax, prep the core for maximum overload. Route all remaining power to the forward thrusters. We're not running, we're diving. Diving? Jax stammered. Into the beam? Into them? Into the heart of it, Eris confirmed, his voice like tempered steel. We take Haven down to the source, to the vault. Alara, you'll need to get to the primary transmitter array down there. If it's intact, if you can broadcast that frequency, it'll kill them, Eris. Alara cried, tears finally spilling over. It'll kill us. The resonance, it'll tear Haven apart from the inside out, and the core, it'll kill the bloom before it spreads, Eris said, his gaze holding hers. It'll give the galaxy a chance. Maybe the remnant in the deep bunkers, maybe others out there. He looked at his crew, his family forged in ash. This is why we rose, isn't it? Not just to survive, but to mean something. To stop the fire from consuming everything. A heavy silence fell, filled only by the groaning of Haven's dying structure and the ominous hum of the approaching beam. Then Jack straightened his shoulders, wiping blood from his forehead. Aye, Commander. Prepping core overload. Thrusters. Giving her everything she's got. His voice was shaky, but his hands were steady on the controls. One by one, the other crew members nodded. Fear was still there, etched deep, but beneath it burned the same stubborn flame that had kept them alive in the ruins. They were Deathworlders. They knew how to fight in the dark. Alara, Aris said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Get to the shuttle bay. The moth. It's the only thing that might make it through the atmospheric entry near the vault. I'll get you close. Lara looked at him, seeing the finality in his eyes. He wasn't coming back. He was buying her time with Haven's death dive. She swallowed hard, the scientist in her warring with the woman who'd followed this man through hell. Eris, go, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Be the architect of our doom. The one that saves the rest. Kalen Drax was gone. His dreadnought, his crew, his certainty, all erased into cosmic dust. But his final terrified transmission, fragmented and raw, had been picked up by a long-range Catherfract listening post on the galactic rim. The message was simple, primal. Chaos unleashed. Sol system. Extinction event. Loom. Panic, cold and sharp, spread through the hegemony. Fleets were scrambled. Contingency protocols, designed for galaxy-ending threats, were activated. The Cathar, masters of order, faced their ultimate nightmare. An enemy that didn't just break their rules but unwrote them. An enemy born from the ashes of their greatest correction. But they were too late. The bloom was already spreading. Then screamed through the upper atmosphere of the dead Earth, a dying ember plunging into the heart of the storm. The green-white beam lashed out, striking the ship's hull. Metal didn't melt, it unraveled, dissolving into its base components. Alarms shrieked their final warnings. Hull breaches opened like dark mouths, venting atmosphere into the toxic sky. 5 minutes to core breach. Jax yelled over the cacophony, his hands flying over the thruster controls, fighting to keep the ship on its suicidal trajectory towards the pulsing epicenter of the Chimera's power in the Mariana Trench. Eris stood at the helm, his hands gripping the controls, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Below, the ruins of Earth rushed up to meet them. A landscape of gray slurry and jagged glass spires lit from within by the sickly green glow of the Chimera's activity. He saw the vault entrance, a massive, scarred blast door half buried in the trench wall, pulsing with the same energy as the beam. "Yalara, go, now!" Eris roared. Alara, suited up, gave him one last long look, a look filled with grief, admiration, and a terrible love. Then she turned and ran for the shuttle bay. The Moth, a tiny, battered personnel shuttle, detached from Haven's belly just as a Chimera construct, drawn by the ship's suicidal approach, intercepted it. The construct raised its limb, ready to unmake the shuttle as it had unmade the Cathar drones. But Aris Thorn had one last trick. He slammed the thrusters to maximum, overriding all safeties, sending Haven into a violent, uncontrolled spin directly into the path of the construct. The dying ship, a massive chunk of debris, collided with the shimmering figure. The impact didn't destroy the Chimera, but it disrupted it. For a fraction of a second, the construct flickered, its form destabilizing. It was enough. The Moth shot past, diving like a stone towards the vault entrance, vanishing into the swirling green miasma below. Haven, its purpose served, began to break apart. The core breach alarm became a continuous, deafening shriek. "Jax," Eris said, his voice calm now, almost peaceful, "make it count." Jax met his commander's eyes, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Aye, sir." He slammed his fist down on the final overload control. Haven didn't explode, it imploded. The fractured fusion core, pushed beyond its limits, collapsed in on itself for a nanosecond, creating a micro-singularity that violently rebounded. The resulting blast wasn't fire, but a wave of pure, disintegrating force, a final, desperate scream of human defiance. It washed over the nearby Chimera constructs, not destroying them, but staggering them, disrupting their connection to the central beam for precious seconds. In that moment of chaos, the Moth slammed into the vault entrance, breaching the ancient, reinforced doors. Inside the vault, the air was thick with swirling nanites and the thrumming power of the Chimera's central node, a pulsating sphere of green-white light suspended in the center of the cavernous chamber. Alara stumbled out of the wrecked Moth, her suit's sensors screaming warnings about radiation and exotic energy fields. She saw the primary transmitter array, a massive, archaic dish miraculously intact, covered in dust but humming with residual power. Hope, fragile and desperate, flared in her chest. She ran, scrambling over fallen debris, her boots slipping on the gray slurry floor. The Chimera constructs, recovering from Haven's sacrifice, began to reform at the vault entrance, their obsidian forms coalescing from the swirling energy. They moved towards her, not with haste, but with the inevitability of a closing tomb. Alara reached the transmitter console. Her fingers flew over the dusty keys, bypassing dead systems, rerouting power from the Moth's dying battery. She pulled up the Chimera failsafe protocol, the resonant frequency sequence. It was complex, a symphony of destructive harmonics keyed to the original human genome. She input the final command. The transmitter dish hummed to life, its surface glowing with a soft blue light, the antithesis of the Chimera's green-white. The lead Chimera construct stood before her, blocking the console. It didn't attack, it simply watched. Its smooth surface reflected Alara's terrified, determined face. "Builder," the chorus voice echoed in the chamber, tinged with something almost like sorrow. "You choose the ashes over the bloom." "Yes," Alara whispered, her hand hovering over the activation key. Tears streamed down her face, not just for herself but for Aris, for Jax, for all the remnant, for the galaxy that might yet be saved. Because the ashes remember. The bloom forgets. She pressed the key. The transmitter dish erupted, not with a beam but with a wave, a silent, invisible pulse of resonant energy, tuned to the very core of what it meant to be human, the fragile, chaotic, beautiful, flawed spark that the Chimera had transcended, but that Alara and Aris had chosen to protect. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The central Chimera node pulsed violently, then fractured. Cracks of pure darkness spiderwebbed across its surface. The green-white light flickered, dimmed, then began to bleed. Not light, but a dark, viscous substance that evaporated into nothingness. The chimera constructs surrounding Alara shuddered. Their obsidian forms lost their cohesion, becoming translucent, then insubstantial. They didn't scream. They simply dissolved, like smoke in a strong wind. Their collective consciousness, the chorus voice, let out a final fading whisper that echoed through the vault and out into the dying soul system. The design is flawed. Then, silence. The green beam winked out. The swirling nanites in the vault settled, inert, harmless gray dust. The oppressive psychic pressure lifted. Alara slumped against the console, gasping. The transmitter's blue light the only illumination in the vast dark chamber. She was alone. Ares was gone. Haven was gone. The Chamera were gone. But outside, the sky was clearing. For the first time in 50 years, the perpetual cloud cover over the Pacific scab began to thin. Weak, pale sunlight, the light of a star humanity had almost forgotten, filtered down through the ash. Weeks later, Alara Voss stood on the surface, near the ruins of Haven's final resting place, a crater of fused glass and twisted metal. She wore no suit. The air was still thin, still toxic in places, but breathable with filters. The nanites were dormant, harmless. The scouring radiation was fading. Around her, other figures emerged from hidden bunkers and deep shelters. Men, women, children, the remnant. They looked up at the sky, shielding their eyes from the unfamiliar sun, tears streaming down faces weathered by decades of darkness. They saw not just a star, but a future. Alara held a data slate. On it was a message, weak but clear, picked up by rebuilt sensors. It wasn't from the Cainthar. It was from a dozen different sources, scattered across the spiral arm. Distress calls, refugee whispers of a bloom that had started in Sol System, and then abruptly stopped. Whispers of a human signal that had silenced the chaos. The galaxy knew. They knew Earth wasn't dead. They knew the Deathworlders had risen, and they knew what they had done. Alara looked out over the ruins, not with despair but with a quiet, hard-won hope. They had stopped the architects of doom, but the cost, Ares, Jax, Haven, the terrible power they had unleashed and then sacrificed to contain. She knelt, picking up a handful of the gray slurry, the ashes of their world, the dust of the Chimera, the remnants of the Cathar dreadnought. It was cold, lifeless. But as she let it sift through her fingers, a tiny, almost invisible shoot of green pushed through the gray near her boot. A mutated lichen, perhaps. Or something new. Something that remembered the fire but chose to grow anyway. From the ruins of Earth, they had risen, not as survivors clinging to the past, not as architects of doom, but as guardians, as the keepers of a terrible, necessary secret. That sometimes the greatest strength isn't in remaking the world but in choosing to let it heal, even if the healing takes 1,000 years, even if the scars never fade. The sun, weak but persistent, warmed her face. The wind, no longer howling with ash, carried the faint, clean scent of ozone and possibility. The galaxy was watching, and the remnant, forged in fire and tempered by sacrifice, would meet its gaze. Not with weapons, but with the quiet, unbreakable resilience of those who had walked through hell and chosen to build a garden in the ashes.